Thank you all for coming this morning, and I should say good morning, Greenwood. Let me share a few of the exciting things that are happening here in Greenwood Village, the epicenter of the vibrant Denver South area. Debt status: Greenwood Village has no long-term debt, no short-term debt, and no pension debt. And I know those of you in the banking community are not happy with us, but what can I say? In our 8.4 square miles, the daytime population is about 55,000 people and 14,625 overnight. Our 2.932 millage rate on a residential property amounts to $175 on a $750,000 house. Now, the thing that makes the city work are its employees. And we really have employee empowerment, where if they're empowered, if they see something that needs to be done, they go out and they do it. We also have a cutting-edge policing philosophy where we go and figure out where the crime has been and where it's more likely to happen, and that's where we put our resources. We've had numerous award-winning kudos for our departments in the city. We have easily traveled roadways with 47 adaptive traffic signals, excuse me, that for those of you that are considered to be type A, if there's not any cross traffic and it's not during rush hour, the signal will change for you and keep you moving. We are a business-friendly environment. We have unique residential neighborhoods and diverse cultural experiences. Award-winning parks and open space. In fact, almost 10% of the city is open space or parks. Now what I want to do is show you a couple of great pictures of what has happened in the last year or is about to happen coming out of the ground in the second quarter this year. And we'll start first with Landmark Medical Building on Roslyn, which went ahead and took care of an eyesore that had come to pass in the village. First Citizens Bank from North Carolina is building where the old Morton's was on Bellevue. AMG Bank is building on the corner of Bellevue, on the corner of Greenwood Plaza Boulevard and Peakview. And then we also have the Village Center Station on the west side, which will start with the CoBank building, which is topped out, and that's over 71 million. The Village Center Station Plaza, which, with all due respect to my great friend and the Director of Interregional Affairs, Anthony Graves, this area is going to be bigger than the Cherry Creek Art Festival, and we won't have to block off any streets. Sorry, Anthony. Then also continuing, as I just mentioned, we have CoBank, which is a wonderful architectural design village village center addition. And then on the east side of I-25, the Village Center, is we recently approved for Granite Corporation a speculative 10-story building with additional parking garage for the growth that they anticipate here on the south side. And last but not least, in terms of building, is something that will benefit the entire South Metro area, and that's a 5-star Westin hotel, which will have 203 rooms, space for 450, so we're going to grow the state of the village to 450 people, and also a swimming pool, and it will be located where the park and ride surface lot is, and there's still plenty of slots left in the garage. And I might add, back to those giants I talked about earlier, both Dave Pfeiffer and Nancy Sharp were very much building the foundation of what happened years ago with all the construction of T-Rex and moving the patrol station, and without their work, Westin would not have happened. We also have some very unique businesses. The very first Trader Joe's that opened in Colorado was in Cherry Hills Marketplace, which unfortunately, Laura, it's not in Cherry Hills, it's in Greenwood Village, even if it is called Cherry Hills Marketplace. But you're welcome to visit anytime. We also have next to Trader Joe's Pharmaca, which is a compounding pharmacy which gets very technical, and I have now reached the limit of my knowledge on that subject. Sierra Trading Post, great place to get some winter gear and climbing gear. And for those of you that are into high-end activities like this $1,000 hockey stick, et cetera, you want to go to the one and only place in the metro area where you can get those high-end athletic equipment, and that's Monkey Sports, which has just opened its first outfit here in Colorado. And then on the international scene, there's a company that has come to Greenwood Village called Espresso Americano, and they have opened their 166th store, the other 165 being in Panama, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Honduras. And they picked Greenwood Village for their first international location. And this month, they're opening their second U.S. location in the Landmark. So, John, you'll be able to walk over there and get your espresso. And lastly, in the residential TOD arena, Cayley Pond Townhomes is approved and is already under construction, and it'll be a very short walk to the Arapahoe Light Rail Station. The state of the city is great. I am humbled and honored to be the mayor of Greenwood Village. Thank you for your attention. And now to the real great part of the show, and that is communication. You know, humans love to communicate, and we are privileged to have a master communicator by not only the spoken word, but also the written word. And so this esteemed Colorado resident has joined us this morning. His bio is on the back of your program. And please join me in extending a very warm welcome to truly world-renowned journalist T.R. Reid.
Thanks, Mayor.
You're welcome, sir.
Thanks. Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, everybody. Hi, everybody. I'm so pleased to be here. I'm very pleased to be here. First, because it just gives me a chance to say thank you to Greenwood Village and to the other southern communities down here. I'm your neighbor just to the north, and I am frequently in Greenwood Village using your parks and your bike trails and your hiking trails and shopping and dining in your restaurants. And I think anybody like me who's interested in local government can see that this place is working. This is a secure, attractive, friendly, well-organized community. Anybody, I think, can see that. Now, as I said to Mayor Ron the other day, you know, you've got half of the tech center. You probably have the best tax base of any city of 15,000 in the whole country. It ought to be well run, but they're doing a good job. Anybody who comes down from the wilds of Denver can see that. I see that all the time. Now, our plan for today was that the mayor would tell you the state of the village, and then we just get slightly broader, just get a little broader. My job is to talk about the state of the world, just slightly different, and there are two problems here. I can tell you just from talking to people before the breakfast, there are a lot of people in this room who could probably explain the state of the world better than I can. There are a lot of people here who travel and know what's going on, but the mayor picked me, so we're stuck with me. And then the next problem is Mayor Ron didn't give me any time. He gave me very little time to do this. He gets 20 minutes for this village of 8 square miles, and I get 20 minutes for the whole world. Is that fair? So what we're going to do is we're going to take what the diplomats call a whirlwind tour around the world to see what's going on at this point in the 21st century. And I'll just tell you, I'm a reporter, and I'll try to be an objective reporter about this. I'll be frank. I'll tell you what's working in these other countries. I'll tell you what's not working. I just try to be, objective and straightforward. And, since I'm going to be frank and get right to the point, I'll also tell you my hidden agenda. Why not? I'll tell you why I really came down here this morning. So here's the thing, the mayor didn't give me any time. I really have to brush over this stuff so rapidly. So my hope is that some of you might say, gee, that was pretty interesting. I wonder if there are any books I could buy about that stuff. That's the strategy here. And since I'm a newspaper man, I'll begin with the headline. This is the important news. In the 2 months into the year 2015, or if we took a look a little bigger, 1.5 decades into the 21st century, there is no question that the United States, our country, is the richest, most powerful, the freest, the most innovative nation on earth. We're number one in so many ways. Americans like to fill stadiums and chant we're number one, and you know, in most important ways, it's true. And it's even more true since the end of the Great Recession in 2008 and 2009, because our country, the United States, has come back faster and stronger from the recession than anybody else. And I can tell you, having just spent some time in Europe, this really miffed the Europeans. They don't like that because they see the Great Recession as an American product. They think it was made in the USA. You know, it was our lax lenders and our credit agencies and our corrupt investment bankers, you know, that's what they think, who led the United States into this economic collapse in September of 2008, which spread around the world. All the other countries, rich and poor, Africa, Asia, Western Europe, South America, are still struggling to climb out of this. And look at the United States. We are doing splendidly. So I think the headline is, at this point, 1.5 decades into the 21st century, the United States is sitting pretty. We're doing fine. I hear people, on Sunday I was watching one of those talk shows, and I heard the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, said that American industry has been battered by the Obama administration. American industry is struggling terribly under this heavy hand of regulation. And I think the only word for that statement is, it's baloney. It's wrong. American business is thriving at this point. Corporate profits, record high. CEO compensation, record high. Board members' compensation, record high. If American business is struggling, how come the world's smartest investors have driven up the market value of all American companies to record levels every month? Our stock indexes break another record. NASDAQ 5,000 2 days ago, the Dow's at 18.2. Where is this struggling American industry? We're not struggling. We're doing fantastically. And even with the strongest currency in the world, we are able to sell our manufactured goods all over the world. The U.S. we're just doing fine. We have our problems, and even though they didn't give me much time, I'm going to take a little time at the end to talk about our problems. We have our problems, but basically, compared to every other country, rich or poor, the U.S. is doing pretty well at this point in the 21st century. And one striking thing about our country is we're really the only country that can assert both hard power and soft power in the global sphere. This distinction, hard power and soft power, have you heard of this before? This is an idea that was kind of invented by Professor Joseph Nye at Harvard. And what he's saying is, if you want to look at a country's ability to influence the world and a nation's ability to get done what it wants done in the world, there are two ways you do this. Hard power, which means basically the power to force other countries to do what you want. You do that through military power or financial power. And then soft power is the power to persuade other countries that they want to do what you want. Soft power is cultural power. It's the power of emulation, it's aspiration, other countries wanting to be like us, wanting to be our ally, and therefore they do what we want. In military terms, there's no question the U.S. is the strongest country in the world. You know, nowadays, if you want to assert military power to some distant part of the world, the way you do it is either with with airplanes or with aircraft carrier task forces. An aircraft carrier task force can get you and your military power anywhere in the world quite quickly. They're incredibly expensive to maintain an aircraft carrier task force. The United States has 11 of them. We have 11 of them all over the world. There's only one other country that even has one, and that's France. They have the carrier Charles de Gaulle, and it's so expensive that it never leaves port. It's always in port in the Mediterranean. So, I mean, sheer military power, nobody can match us. And the result, I mean, we spend more on our military than the next 12 countries combined. And the result is no country is going to start a war with the U.S. You'd be crazy to do that. But does that make us safe? Do you think Americans feel safe today for all this money we spend on defense? I don't think so. Because no country's going to attack us, but the fact is there are ragtag mobs of terrorists all over the world who would be delighted to pick a fight with the United States. It's their thing, and we have never quite figured out how to deal with that kind of enemy. And so here's the question I want to ask you. We're spending $600 billion a year on defense, and every election people stand up and say, we're in trouble, we got to spend more on the Army and Navy. You know, we're spending more than the other next dozen countries combined, and when's the last time we won a war? I think the answer to that, you have to go back to 1991 when we won a 3-week war against Iraq, a country that's half the size of California. And since then, I don't know that this spending is buying us what it ought to be. I just leave that question for you. In terms of finance, the United States is clearly the financial power of the world anywhere in the world. The term Wall Street is synonymous with high finance. Does anybody here know the City of London? Does anybody know Frankfurt? You know, those places consider themselves financial centers. They are. Kasumi Gaseki is the financial center of Tokyo. Yeah, it's a financial power, but nothing like the United States. And I think as evidence of it, you can see our Justice Department in the last 2 years has been assessing these huge fines, hundreds of millions of dollar fines against banks in the UK and Switzerland, Germany, and Luxembourg. And guess what? They pay. They pay these fines to a foreign government, and the reason is they've got to do business in the United States because we are so important in the financial world. Do you think if the government of Luxembourg imposed $1 billion fine on JP Morgan Chase, would they pay? No, we don't need Luxembourg the way Luxembourg, Germany, Switzerland, everybody else needs us. So that's hard power, and we've got it. We've got it. We haven't found a way yet to assert it against these bands of terrorists who are causing all the trouble in the world. But in terms of other countries, we're there. We're the most powerful. In terms of soft power, this is cultural power. This is where people get their entertainment and culture and entertaining. You go anywhere in the world, rich country, poor country, east, west, it doesn't matter. Everywhere, people are singing our songs. They're downloading our apps. They're watching our movies. They're wearing our fashions. They're eating our burgers and our fried chicken, drinking our coffee. Everywhere in the world, American soft culture is really dominant. I was in Tokyo last fall in a karaoke bar, and while I was there, maybe 2 hours, 3 people came up and sang Rocky Mountain High in Tokyo. This is cultural power. I was in France with my kids in June, and you know, the French, they love to dump on America. It's kind of their thing, and they're always dumping on us. And yet, you sit in a cafe in Paris, it's quite delightful actually, sit in an outdoor cafe in Paris in June, and everybody who walks past you on the sidewalk is wearing Nikes, drinking Starbucks, and listening to Taylor Swift or Lil Wayne on their iPod, you know. This is cultural power. Everywhere in the world, it's cool to be American. It's cool to wear American fashions. It's cool to sing American songs. And every country in the world, rich or poor, in their public schools requires that all the students learn English. That's not because of the UK or Australia. That's because people want to do business with the United States. So we're doing fine. We're sitting pretty. We have some problems, which I'll get to in a minute, but relative to all the other countries, the United States is in pretty good shape, is what I would conclude. So let's contrast that to other parts of the world. Let's start in Western Europe. The fact is, or all of Europe, Eastern Europe too, Europe is struggling. We can see that. I mean, the euro is falling. Unemployment rates are very high. They can't figure out what to do about immigration. It's kind of the same problem we have. They're more worried about it. They can't figure out how to fight terrorists, another problem that we have. So we can see problems in Europe. And yet, I think there's a lot of good going on in Europe. You know, Europe today, because of this new entity, the European Union, is more unified today than any time since the Roman Empire 2,000 years ago. There are 28 countries in the European Union. 19 of them have thrown away their francs and liras and marks and pesetas and adopted a common currency. And, you know, I know actually 25 countries use the euro because little countries like Andorra and San Marino are using it. The Vatican uses the euro, but there are 19 countries that have adopted it. And we hear about the euro as a struggling currency, but the fact is, in 2002, the euros came out on January 1st of 2002, and I happened to be in Europe writing about it at the time, and I bought a bunch of euros and put them in a bank in Brussels. When I bought those euros, they cost 89 cents a euro. 89 cents bought 1 euro. A year ago, each of my euros was worth $1.40. Today, my euros are worth $1.12 each. Well, you know, that's less than a year ago, but it's 25% more than when that currency was begun. So I don't know that the euro is struggling. We've heard about the problems in Greece. Maybe Greece would have to leave the euro. I think that would be fabulous for the other countries. It's a huge drag on their currency. If Greece would go back to the drachma, that would be fine. But as I say, the Europeans, they're kind of resentful of the United States, of how well we're doing after this recession that, as I said, they think we caused. There's kind of a sour mood, I think, in a lot of Europe. Britain, France, even Germany, very successful country, they just don't feel that great. They're worried about the economy, they're worried about terrorism, and as I always say to them, I don't know how many of you travel to Europe, but I mean, there's really a lot to like about life in Europe. Let's take a look at life in Western Europe. Nobody in Western Europe has to worry about saving $200,000 to send their kids to college, like we all do. No kid in Western Europe graduates from college with $40,000 of student loan debt because they've made higher education free. They think that's a useful investment, and it saves people from that worry. There are 31 million Americans who don't have health insurance, people who live in fear, in terror of getting sick. They're in the richest country in the world. Last night, thousands of kids went to bed with a toothache because their parents can't afford to take them to the dentist in our country. Nobody has that problem in Europe. Nobody's going to lose their health insurance if the Supreme Court rules the wrong way today. Everybody is covered. They have excellent health plans. They have better health statistics than we do. So that's another kind of worry of life that we live with and they don't have. Their crime rates are way below ours. Britain, France, Germany, Switzerland, 1/100th our rate of murder. Nobody in Germany worries that when their kid goes to school, somebody might show up with an automatic weapon and roll people down. It's another worry of life that they don't have. So I think that's not bad. And, you know, they know how to enjoy life. I don't know if you know this, but in most European countries, by law, they get 5 or 6 weeks of paid vacation a year. Anybody here have that deal? And guess what? They take it. When I was the London bureau chief of the Washington Post, I had 6 people working for me, 5 Brits. And every Friday, I guarantee you, every Friday, somebody would come in and say to me, you know, I'm off next week, you know. And I'd say, well, Teresa, didn't you just go to Mallorca for 2 weeks last month? Yeah, but you know, I get 6 weeks and I'm taking them. And they say, Teresa used to say to me, she's a pretty smart woman, she was a British reporter who worked for me, Teresa said to me, "How come you Americans work so hard? Why do you work all the time? Why don't you take 6 weeks like we do?" You know, I think they've got to kind of figure it out. So, and then, this is quite important, the European Union, this unified state, is looking more and more like a United States. I wrote a whole book about that. It's called The United States of Europe. About, is it four years ago, I did a piece for National Geographic about this. And just as a test, the photographer and I got in, we rented this huge black BMW, and we started at the Arctic Circle in Finland. We drove down across the Baltic into mainland Europe and all the way down to the southeast corner of Portugal on the Mediterranean. Went through about 12 countries. We never saw a border guard, and we never changed our currency. It's like driving through the United States now. It's a really unified place. So, yeah, Europe is struggling, and Europeans don't feel good about their life, and they're pissed off at America for doing so well. But in many ways, they've figured out how to craft a good life. Okay, now the next stop on our whirlwind tour, I mean, I got to go fast. It's the mayor's fault here. Let's go to East Asia. It's the other rich place in the world, where 3 of the world's 4 richest countries are: Japan, China, and South Asia. India, according to the International Monetary Fund, have ranked 2nd, 3rd, and 4th in the world in GDP and gross domestic product. That's total national wealth. Let's start with Japan. I think Japan is an amazing country. If you look at Japan, you know, they started a war and lost it horrendously. It was a totally shattered country. And when the U.S. occupying army left in 1954, Japan had nothing. It was a totally shattered country. In 1954, Japan's gross domestic product, its wealth, was smaller than Egypt. It was smaller than Romania. And Japan is a country with no resources, no oil, no coal, no timber. They don't have room to grow food. They have to import 95% of all the food they eat. No iron ore, no aluminum. They don't have any resources. And guess what? In 30 years, they built the 2nd richest country in the world. By 1984, they had the 2nd highest GDP in the world after the United States. It's just an amazing story. And the way they did it, this success story has now been copied all over the world. It's called the Japanese model. And just to go very quickly through this, how do you go from nothing to the 2nd richest country in the world in 3 decades? Here's what you do. You strongly emphasize education, and particularly science and engineering. You very strongly push a culture of savings so that people put their money in the banks, and then the banks can invest in domestic industries and build up an industrial base. Then you set up tariff protections to protect your domestic industries, so your domestic market has to buy from your own industries, and they grow strong. And then, when you have industry established, then you start stressing design and innovation, technology, and quality. And then you can sell your products all over the world, and look at the result. Everybody in here knows iconic Japanese brands: Honda, Toyota, Panasonic, Nikon, Canon, Sony, Toshiba, Mitsubishi, Kawasaki. These are global brands. They sell all over the world from a country, as I said, that, you know, started with nothing and built itself up. That's the Japanese model of growth, and it worked so well that a lot of countries, particularly in East Asia, copied it. They're sometimes called, Japan was called the economic tiger, and these are called the little tigers. Taiwan, South Korea, Malaysia to a degree, Indonesia is now doing it. Singapore is a different model because they're mainly about finance. You know, it's an island state of 3 million. It's pretty small, but all over East Asia, and now India is trying to copy this Japanese model with its huge population and its huge domestic market. And Japan is struggling. I mean, they're 2 decades into a recession, but boy, has anybody been to Japan lately? You know, don't you think? I mean, it's such a rich-looking country. They're so wealthy. They have a per capita income of about $38,000 per year per capita. Ours is about 43. China, you think of China as a rich country, per capita income of $2,300 a year. Japan's is 19 times as high. I did a movie for the A&E network a few years ago on the Asian financial crisis. And A&E is kind of cheap. They didn't have much money, so they could only afford to go to one country to do this. And the producer decided to go to Japan. And at that time, Japan was, 10 or 12 years into a recession. And you go to Japan and you saw this. Everybody is beautifully dressed. Everybody has a new car. The stores are full of goods. You walk into any store and a lovely young woman in a uniform and white gloves bows to you, and then 14 people come to serve you. I mean, and the producer said to me after 2 days of this, the producer came to me and said, geez, where's the recession? Because you can't see it. I mean, it's still a pretty successful country, even though they're 2 years into recession and fell back into recession again last fall. So economically, Japan is said to be struggling. You know what their unemployment rate is? Anybody guess? 3.5%. When they have economic troubles, they don't lay people off. That's too cruel for them. That's too ruthless. And when the IMF and the World Bank and the U.S. government go there and talk to them about their economic crisis, they say, you got to get tough. You got to lay off people. They just won't do it. They won't do it. And the result is their economy is struggling. But I think life there is not bad. So now let's jump across the Japan Sea to China, the big tiger. Now the second richest country in the world in GDP. You know what they say, 90% of everything you can buy in a Walmart is made in China, kind of thing. And China also has had a remarkable period of growth, but their model is different. Their model is different. Instead of the science and technology, the quality and design that the Japanese and Taiwanese and South Koreans used, China has just done it through brute force. We got 1.3 billion people. Most of them make less than $2 a day, so they are willing to go to a factory for 10 hours and make your radios and make your t-shirts and make your running shoes and do it all for $2 a day. And the result is they did import all sorts of manufacturing from all over the world by saying, if we'll make it cheaper, come to us and we'll make it cheaper. That's what they offered. I don't know, some people in this room probably have an iPhone. It's a triumph of American technology. There's never been an iPhone made in the United States. 88% of them are made in China because the Chinese are willing to assemble this product cheaper than anybody else. And here's the flaw with that model, which the Chinese are now running into. If your economic raison d'etre is we'll do it cheaper, guess what? Some other country will come along and do it even cheaper than you. And this is what China's now seeing. Nike, Levi's, Polo, et cetera, are moving their manufacturing to Bangladesh, to Nicaragua, to India, because those countries, South Africa, those countries will now do it cheaper. And this is a problem for China. So China now is trying, I think a little late, but they're trying to adopt this Japanese model. Let's build high quality, high technology products and sell them to the world. I don't think it's been successful. I mean, I just told you a bunch of iconic Japanese brands. We all know iconic South Korean brands, Hyundai, Samsung, Lucky Gold Star, Kia. Name some iconic Chinese products. Come on, it's the second richest country in the world. Anybody? Well, people might know Lenovo. Lenovo bought IBM's personal computer business. Lenovo bought Motorola phones. Anybody heard of Lenovo? That's probably the most famous one. How about Huawei? Anybody know Huawei? Biggest seller of cell phones in China, and therefore like the third or fourth biggest seller of cell phones in the world. Alibaba, you've heard Alibaba. It's kind of a combination Amazon and Google for China. Very successful company. How about Xiaomi? Anybody heard of Xiaomi? Xiaomi is a Chinese cell phone company which is now coming into the United States market. Nobody's ever heard of them. OnePlus, anybody heard of OnePlus? Is a competing cell phone company. Here's what I'm saying. Because they started on this we'll do it cheaper model, they're now struggling to catch up to the other East Asian countries that have built a market on quality and technology and design, and maybe they'll get there. I don't know. Here's an interesting question for you. So China has come from nowhere in 15 years. 15 years ago, they were probably the 20th richest country in the world. Today, they rank second in GDP. Huge population. Is China inexorably going to get to the top? Are they going to pass the United States and become the richest country in the world? Are they going to take over everything? You know, I think there are some issues there. So if you look at China, they're slowing down a little bit today, but for the last 10 years, they've looked like a bullet train just racing down the track towards world domination. And what I think is going to happen is they're going to hit a couple of speed bumps along the way. One is, I think we all learned this in school. I totally believe this. As people get richer and as people see free markets and have a choice of things to buy in the market, guess what? They start to demand free political institutions too. They want a choice of things to vote for in government. Capitalism leads to democracy, and China definitely doesn't want that. The cadres in Beijing who are running China, they don't want to deal with this problem. I think it's an issue. I said this at a forum in China. I said, you watch out, you know, people are going to start demanding their rights. And the Chinese, they're very polite. And I said, oh, no, Mr. Reed, you're terribly wrong. You see, the Chinese were Confucians, and as long as Chinese people have money, they don't care what the government is doing. That was the argument. No, it's not true. I mean, if you look at South Korea is a Confucian nation, just as Confucian as China. And what they did, they got rich. They developed this export-based economy. The South Koreans started to get rich, and I was on the streets in Seoul in 1989, and people by the millions, they had a military dictatorship then that was supported by the United States. By the millions, people went out in the streets, and not just lefty students. Brokers in three-piece suits, doctors, nurses, lawyers went out in the streets and demanded free elections. And sure enough, in 1989, they threw out the dictator, elected an elected president. He was a general, the first one. And 5 years later, his one term was up, and he stepped aside, and they had another free election. It became a democracy because people demanded it. And won't that happen in China? And then here's the other issue facing China, I think. You know, when I was growing up, there was a USSR, there was a Soviet Union, was our big enemy in the world. Totally powerful. They had nuclear weapons. They had satellites. And it was huge. You know, it goes from Europe to the Pacific Ocean. And what we discovered in 1989 and 1990 when it fell apart was that it really was never a Soviet Union. It was 27 or 28 different countries with different cultures and different languages and didn't give a damn about what was going on in Moscow. And when they had the chance, they all broke away. And mark my words, I definitely think that could happen in China. Taiwan already got away. Taiwan is an independent country. The Chinese don't admit it. In fact, the United States doesn't admit this. Did you know this? We have a one China policy officially. We say that the island of Taiwan is part of the People's Republic of China. It's not, but that's our policy for some reason. I think what's called Inner Mongolia, they'd love to get away. The Tibetans are already in revolt. They'd like to get away. In Western China, there are about 4 million people. The Uyghurs, 400 million people. They don't speak Chinese. They don't give a damn about anything in Beijing. They would love to be independent. And then, you know, if you go to Hong Kong all the way up the Pearl River to the Guangdong Delta, that whole part of China doesn't want anything to do with the mainland. They'd like to be independent. I think it's quite possible that this huge monolith of China is going to turn into 10 or 12 smaller countries. We'll watch for this. I'm a little less worried about China taking over the world than some are for that reason. So I've only done like the United States in two parts of the world, I'm going to have to skip a whole bunch of countries. So if I've ignored a country that you really like, blame the mayor. It's his fault. I should mention these countries called the BRICS. You know the BRICS, B-R-I-C-S? Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. These were, until the recession, these were fast-growing, smaller economies that seemed to be coming up. China obviously did. The other ones have been stalled by the recession. They really haven't come out of it very well, and particularly Russia. You know, Russia is a dictatorship. This dictator, Putin, he's a kleptocrat. I mean, he and his buddies have stolen billions from the state treasury, and he based his whole economy on exporting oil and gas, and look what happened to him. So I don't see any issue there. So I've skipped a lot of the world, but I promised you that I would come back to the problems in the United States. As I said, we're doing fine relative to the rest of the world. In many ways, we're number one, but we have our problems. We have a government that's spending about $500 billion a year more than it takes in. Can we continue to do that? Is that sustainable? And yes, President Obama points out, and he's right, that the federal deficit has fallen in half since 5 years ago. That's true. It's still $500 billion a year. At the moment, we are borrowing this money from China and Japan and the Saudis at less than 1%. That's fine. What happens when interest rates go up? What happens when interest payments to foreign countries, foreign investors, become 10 or 15% of our national budget? I don't know how long this can go on. Healthcare, I think, is a national disgrace. The United States, you know, even with Obamacare, if Obamacare works perfectly, and it hasn't so far, and if the Supreme Court leaves Obamacare in place, even if it works, we're going to have 31 million Americans without health insurance in the year 2020, according to the Congressional Budget Office. That's disgraceful. It's shameful. According to the National Academy of Sciences, about 22,000 Americans die every year of treatable diseases because they can't afford a doctor. This is happening in the world's richest country. You know how many Brits die because they can't afford a doctor? 0. Germany, 0. France, 0. Netherlands, 0. Japan, 0. South Korea, 0. Other rich countries don't let this happen. All the other rich countries cover everybody. They have better health statistics than we do, all of them, and they spend half as much as the United States on health care. We could definitely do this. There is no question that we could cover everybody in America for about half the cost of what we're spending now. If you want to know how, I mean, there's a whole book about this. And you know, I know you're busy. You may not have time to read my book. I mean, you could still buy it. That doesn't take any time. But since you brought me down here and gave me breakfast, I'm a nice guy. I'm going to reduce my whole book to a bumper sticker. You ready? If France can do it, the United States can do it. All these other countries cover everybody, good results, half our cost. We could do it too if we set our mind to it, if we had the political will. Our tax code is a mess. We have the most complicated, the least efficient, and probably the least fair tax system of any of the rich countries. Immigration, some people see it as a huge problem, some people see it as an opportunity. In any case, it's clearly a national issue. And here's the point. On all those major issues, everybody agrees we got to fix them. We got to fix the deficit. We got to fix healthcare. We got to reform the tax code. And we're not doing it because we're kind of stuck in this state of political gridlock where we can't seem to get anything done. And it'll be a very interesting question if the Supreme Court rules, I think they're going to rule in June, that Obamacare is invalid. That's going to send millions of Americans who now have health insurance off the rolls. It'll be very interesting to see if our Congress can find any way to get its act together to provide health insurance to 8 or 10 million people who are going to lose it. I mean, it's unthinkable that we would take 10 million people who have insurance today and kick them out. But you know, it's thinkable. because our Congress can't seem to get things done. So I think this polarization, this gridlock is a problem. But, guess what? It's been worse. The issues we see now have been worse. I mean, if you want to take it to the extreme, in 1850, the United States was badly split. We didn't know what kind of country we were. Were we a modern industrial country with protections for workers and unions? Or were we an agricultural society built on slave labor? We couldn't figure that out. And our congressional leaders, our political leaders couldn't resolve this. That gridlock was so bad that we had the most lethal war in history over that political issue. You know, and as bad as things are today, people call each other names. You know, Fox News, they're constantly denouncing Obama, but nobody's going to start a civil war. We're not that bad. And you don't have to go back that far. In 1980, that was the first presidential campaign I covered. I covered Ronald Reagan in 1980. It was really fun. And do you remember 1980? Maybe you're too young, but the U.S. was a mess. It was a mess. 12% unemployment, interest rates at 18%, 14% inflation. I mean, it was, you know, Reagan had this number called the misery index. He added unemployment, inflation, and interest rates. It was like 40, and ran on that. At the same time, the United States had 55 Americans held hostage in Tehran, Iran, and we couldn't get them out. The great, powerful United States was hopeless against this mob in Tehran, and Americans felt terrible. They felt terrible. When I was covering that campaign in 1980, you know, the pollsters always ask this question, is the U.S. on the right track or the wrong track? 79% said wrong track. We were going wrong. Americans felt terrible about themselves, and we were badly divided. We were so badly divided that in the Democratic Party, a prominent senator ran against the incumbent president in the primaries because that party was so badly divided. And guess what? We elected a president that everybody liked, Ronald Reagan. Whatever you think of his policies, he was a terrific leader, he was a great leader. By 1984, 4 years later, it was morning in America. Everybody was in agreement. An incumbent president won 48 states, and Americans felt great about themselves. So, yeah, we have these problems. We can't seem to face them. We're struggling from gridlock, but we have a fabulous base. I mean, economically, we are doing better than any country in the world. In cultural power, we lead the world. And even though we're struggling with political gridlock, we've been there before and come out of it. And so I'm pretty optimistic about the United States of America. Thank you.